Welcome back to Trust Your Eyes. We are still waiting for the first week of finals, but there's been plenty of important football news and stories. None bigger than Christian Petracca and Melbourne. On Saturday, the D's and Petracca released a joint statement ensuring Melbourne fans that their superstar would not be leaving after weeks of speculation. Are you buying that all of a sudden Petracca is back on board with the Melbourne Football Club? Well, the simple answer is not at all. This seems on both sides to be a bit of a patch-up job. And I do think if Petracca was out of contract, he would be asking for a trade out. But if we look at the circumstances where he wants to go, which is one of the big Melbourne clubs, probably Carlton or Collingwood in reality, they just simply don't have the resources and don't want to do the deal. But I'll definitely be keeping a close tab on how Melbourne go next year. They're going to be a big story because I think in the statement, Petracca made it clear he'll be in Melbourne colours for 2025, but who knows beyond that, because as we know, next season, next trade period, teams will be able to trade another year of first round picks. So if the issues that are apparent right now are still there in 12 months' time, then you would think Petracca would request a trade, and I think a club like Carlton or Collingwood with more resources to give to Melbourne would be able to do a trade, and I think he could be out by next year. But for Melbourne fans, he will be in your colours for 2025. They've got to fix a few things. He's got to play well as well and try to come back mentally and physically ready. So it'll be a fascinating storyline, but I'm not buying that him and Melbourne are all of a sudden on the same page. But week 1 of finals begins in a few days. Port Adelaide host Geelong in the first qualifying final and are red-hot favourites. How much pressure is Ken Hinkley under in this final series on a scale of 1 to 10? I think if you asked a Port Adelaide fan, they would probably say a 10 out of 10, that the pressure's never been higher, but I've been sticking throughout this season that it's either going to be this year or next year that Ken Hinkley will be coaching Port Adelaide, then they'll hand over to Josh Carr, and because of that, there's actually some freedom that Ken and the team, I think, can play with. I think they understand that internally. And it's a big reason in the back half of this year they've been able to play with a lot of freedom and quite a lot of flair, especially in the midfield where a lot of the games are won and lost. And Port Adelaide, historically in big finals, their midfield have been a little disappointing. But I don't think that will happen in this final series, especially with the big three in Horn, Francis, Rosie and Butters a year older. So the pressure is also a little bit minimised because they don't have Dan Houston and Kane Farrell, who are two really important players and both in the same line out of their defence. So I think all those circumstances put together, I think Ken is feeling pretty easy about coming into this final series. There's always pressure, but I'm only going to go at a 5 out of 10. But I do worry if this first final goes wrong, if the crowd turns on them, what impact that could have the following week and possibly a semi-final against the Bulldogs or Hawthorn. The Friday night final between the Western Bulldogs and Hawthorn sets up as a blockbuster. Hawthorn's Will Day will not be playing, so what effect will his absence have on this Hawthorn midfield? This is an interesting and pretty important question coming into this elimination final now. They started the year just 1 win and 5 losses without Will Day, so you can say since his return, he basically has been their most valuable player because without him, they haven't won a lot of games. But since round 19, if you look at his stats, he's been tagged a couple games, he's been subbed off twice. He really wasn't impacting that much, and Hawthorn's midfield was still doing really well. In this period of time, they were still the number 1 centre clearance side, so he wasn't affecting them in that part of the ground. But I guess in a versatility sense and a bit of quality, if he can get the ball 20 to 25 times, we know what damage he can do. He's very creative, can go on a wing if they need, and can go into defence in an emergency situation. So they do lose something in that sense, but again, if I'm just looking at the last month of football he played, he wasn't playing great, and it didn't seem to affect Hawthorn too much. Now, whether against this pretty strong and informed Bulldogs midfield, we'll notice his loss. In hindsight, that'll be revealed. Will it be the difference between the two sides? Or maybe if it's a 1-goal game, you could argue that Will Day's at least 2 or 3 goals in terms of value to Hawthorn's side. So it'll be interesting to see what impact his absence will have. Carlton might make a shock decision to bring back Sam Docherty, who has missed this year due to an ACL he sustained against Brisbane. If he and others like Charlie Curnow and Harry Mackay return, what percentage chance do you have of Carlton beating Brisbane? If you had asked me this a week ago, I would have said maybe a 30 or 40% chance, but the longer and closer we get to this final, the less of a chance I'm giving. I'll give them a 15% chance, because even when they had a lot of their players fully healthy and fit, they were out of form. They've won 2 games out of their last 8. I know against West Coast, which was seen as a pretty good win, but the Eagles were terrible that day. And the other was against North Melbourne when they were still pretty healthy. And they did lose that game to St Kilda. It feels like people are treating it as a win. But, Higgins did kick that goal. And they did need a bit of help to get into finals. Now, there isn't much pressure on them. Can Michael Voss create a narrative of we got free rein to go and try and attack this Brisbane team, which we know can get shaky? Sure, he might. And I'm sure if Doherty comes back, he'll use that as an emotional lever as well. But it's just hard to see how Brisbane lose this. They have so much quality. They're very healthy. Their players are in pretty good form, despite goal-kicking woes and kind of dumb decisions here and there. But they'd have to shoot themselves in the foot so many times to lose this. So I fully expect the Lions to advance to the semi-final stage in this final series. Sydney have beaten GWS in both matchups in 2024, but in the 3 finals the teams have played in history, the Giants have won them all and they've been the lower ranked side in each game. Right now, who are you leaning towards and why? I'm going to pick the Greater Western Sydney Giants to do it again, to win 4 straight finals, being the lower ranked side against Sydney. Again, I'm going basically on form. Sydney finished the year relatively well. They had a great win against Adelaide while resting Heaney, and the Giants lost. But Bedford was out, Brent Daniels was out, and they should get those 2 guys back in. And Riccardi, who's a really important foil to Jesse Hogan up forward and can kick a bag himself when he has a really good day. And now I know you can argue that the Swans should get Papley, McInerney back as well. But again, if I'm going in the back half of the year, the Giants had won 7 in a row before losing to the Bulldogs in Ballarat, which is a weird place to play anyway. While I still think Sydney in the back half of this year have been spotty, they still won a few games in patches like we saw against Collingwood. And I just think if both sides play at their best with maximum pressure, I'm going to back in the GWS system and their players to get it done over Sydney. Again, this will be a close game, probably within 3 or 4 goals the margin, but I'm going to back in Adam Kingsley and the Giants to do it 4 straight times to Sydney in finals. Before the finals tips, the AFL Awards night was on Thursday. Bonampelli won MVP and was crowned captain of the All-Australian team, while Nick Dacos won the AFL Coaches Association Award. From the night and the All-Australian team, what were your biggest takeaways? I thought the selectors did a pretty good job. I think they got 90% of the All-Australian team right. There's just a few players I think could have been in the mix that are pretty unlucky. They finally gave All-Australian blazer to Jacob Wiedering, which is fair enough because he'd been in the squad a previous 4 times, so it kind of feels like a bit of a longevity one. But I do think Harris Andrews had a better year and I would have had him over Wiedering, and probably Ryan, to be honest. I didn't think he was all deserving of an All-Australian blazer. The other one was Jake Waterman over Charlie Curnow. This is, to me, seems like a classic one where we kind of treat our superstars a little too harshly. I thought Curnow still had a great year. He's a better player than Waterman, and I would have had him in the team. And the other snub was Merritt. Now, who he goes in for, I'm not sure. Do you take out Butters or Treloar or maybe Whitfield? I'm not sure. So I definitely think Andrews and Curnow were the 2 unluckiest, and maybe Merritt probably runs 3rd place in that category. Bonampelli won MVP, was a bit surprised by that. I probably would have voted for Cripps myself, but I did think it was right that he was the captain of the All-Australian team after being vice-captain 2 times. A bit like Wiedering, it feels like a longevity one that he finally gets to be captain of the best team of the year. So I thought it was a great night, pretty solid team, not too many complaints. From the other 3 finals besides the Battle of the Bridge, who are you tipping and why? Well, for the first qualifying final, I'm going to back in Ken Hinkley and his midfield to get it done against Geelong. I think they'll have too much power and too much burst in there. As long as they can contain Dangerfield, who's pretty much Geelong's only threat in the midfield, I think Port Adelaide will be a bit too good. Now the Friday night game, I'm a Bulldogs supporter, so I have to pick the Bulldogs by about 12 to 18 points. It'll be a close game. It'll be a great game. Even if it is raining, which the forecast is saying right now, I'm not sure that'll affect the Bulldogs as much as perhaps people are thinking. But again, without Will Day, I think Adam Treloar should play out. I'll pick the Bulldogs midfield to gain a bit of ascendancy and one of the tools to get out of control against Hawthorn. And then for the last game, I'll pick Brisbane. I'll be shocked if Carlton can pull it off. I just think they're not in good enough form and they're just too injured and banged up as a whole 23. And as long as Brisbane can keep pretty straight and not do anything too dumb if the game is close, they should get the job done in what should be a great first week of finals. Thanks for listening to Trust Your Eyes. Good luck to your teams if they're in finals, and I'll be back soon.